celebrate the development, while others are accusing the U.S.
In the heart of the volatile Persian Gulf, a shocking event unfolds that could ignite tensions between two global superpowers. A missile launch, a direct assault on one of the United States' most powerful military assets, the USS Abraham Lincoln, an aircraft carrier known for its unmatched firepower and strategic importance. But this isn't just any missile. It's the Fateh, a weapon that has long been shrouded in mystery and fear. Developed by Iran, it represents a new phase in military strategy, one that raises questions about the true capabilities of the country's military forces. What could possibly drive Iran to take such a bold and dangerous step? And how did the United States respond to this unprecedented attack? The world has always known the USS Abraham Lincoln as a symbol of American military supremacy. With a capacity to carry over 70 aircraft and a crew of thousands, it's an immense force on its own, capable of projecting power across the globe. Stationed in the Persian Gulf, its presence has been a constant reminder of the U.S. Navy's dominance in this region. So when news broke that an Iranian missile, the Fateh, had struck dangerously close to the ship, the implications were staggering. But it wasn't just the strike itself that stunned the world. The fallout from this incident sent shockwaves across the international community, sparking debates about security, diplomacy, and the balance of power in the Middle East. The Fateh missile, a modern precision weapon with the ability to strike targets hundreds of miles away, has been a game-changer for Iran. Designed to outsmart advanced missile defense systems, it poses a serious threat to even the most sophisticated military assets. In this video, we'll dive into the details of this missile, its design, capabilities, and the potential it has to shift the balance of power in the region. We'll also look at the precise moment the USS Abraham Lincoln came under fire, and what this attack really means for the future of U.S.-Iran relations. But perhaps the most astonishing part of this story is the reaction that followed. How did the United States, a global military superpower, respond to an assault on one of its most prized assets? The stakes were raised, and the world watched as American officials scrambled to assess the situation. Diplomatically, tensions soared. But militarily? The United States had to ask itself, how far would it be willing to go to defend its interests and maintain its dominance in the region? Was this attack a calculated move by Iran, or a mere miscalculation? And could this be the tipping point for an all-out confrontation between two nations on the brink of war? Stay tuned as we explore the full story, examining the missile strike, the intense aftermath, and what it could mean for the future of global security. Get ready to uncover the secrets behind this shocking attack on the USS Abraham Lincoln and the explosive consequences that followed. In the volatile Persian Gulf, tensions between the United States and Iran have been simmering for decades. The region, home to some of the world's most vital shipping lanes and rich in natural resources, has always been a flashpoint for global conflict. But what happened on that fateful day when Iran launched a missile aimed directly at one of the most formidable symbols of U.S. military power, the USS Abraham Lincoln, was nothing short of a game-changer. This moment, as it turns out, was years in the making, driven by growing frustrations, military posturing, and shifting geopolitical dynamics. For years, the USS Abraham Lincoln had been a key asset in the U.S. Navy's strategy to maintain dominance in the Middle East. With its 1,100-foot-long flight deck, capable of launching and recovering up to 70 aircraft, and a crew of over 5,000, the Lincoln was not just a ship, it was a floating fortress, a symbol of American strength and military reach. Operating in the Persian Gulf for months, the Abraham Lincoln had been positioned as part of a broader strategy to deter Iranian aggression and maintain pressure on Tehran. Its role was crucial, serving as a powerful reminder of the United States' ability to project force in the region. However, as with all power, it also attracted challenges. Over time, Iran's rhetoric grew increasingly hostile, with the country's leaders often issuing threats against U.S. military interests, particularly its naval assets. This tense atmosphere, combined with Iran's growing missile capabilities, set the stage for a dramatic escalation. The Iranian government had been developing missile technology in secret for years, investing heavily in their military arsenal. The Fateh missile, a modern and highly precise weapon, had been a part of their plans to bolster their deterrent capabilities. With a reported range of over 300 miles, the Fateh was designed to be difficult to intercept, capable of bypassing even the most advanced defense systems. Its launch, in this particular incident, was not an act of sheer aggression, but rather a calculated maneuver, meant to send a message to the US and the international community. According to intelligence sources, the missile was launched from a previously undisclosed location on Iranian soil, a barren desert site that had been used for testing long-range missiles in the past. But what made this strike even more remarkable was the precise targeting. Some experts suggested that Iran had used newly developed satellite guidance technology to lock onto the USS Abraham Lincoln's exact position, making this attack feel almost like a surgical strike. At the moment of impact, the USS Abraham Lincoln was conducting routine operations in the Gulf, moving through a narrow stretch of water. The missile was said to have flown just above the ship, its trajectory so precise that it could have caused severe damage had it actually made contact. But the sheer audacity of the attack raised immediate alarms. Military analysts believe the missile's launch was meant to test U.S. defense readiness, with Iran keen on gauging the American response and sending a clear warning about their growing missile capabilities. The question on everyone's mind was whether this would be the spark that led to a larger, uncontrollable conflict, or a mere provocation to test the limits of U.S. patience. In Washington, the news of the missile launch hit like a thunderclap. The White House, Pentagon, and U.S. Navy officials were thrown into an emergency crisis meeting as soon as the missile was detected. The stakes had just been raised dramatically. According to unconfirmed reports, within hours of the missile's launch, a high-level meeting between military commanders and top U.S. defense officials was held in the Oval Office. The conversation was intense, with military leaders advising President Trump and his team on the potential consequences of any immediate action. Many urged restraint, wary of escalating into full-blown war. But others, particularly from the military's hardline factions, were already pushing for a retaliatory strike to show that such acts of aggression would not go unpunished. While the U.S. debated its options, Iran seemed undeterred. Tehran's official response to the missile strike was a mix of defiance and justification. In a public statement, an Iranian spokesman said that the strike was a warning to the United States and its allies, calling it a defensive measure in response to ongoing American military provocations in the region. Iranian officials also claimed that their missile systems had been tested to full operational capability, and this strike proved they could defend their interests, even against the most powerful forces on Earth. Some analysts believe that Iran was using this moment to cement its position as a regional power, showing its willingness to confront U.S. forces directly if necessary. As the global community watched the situation unfold, there was an eerie sense of uncertainty. Would the U.S. take immediate action? How would Iran's allies, such as Russia and China, react to an attack on an American warship? The incident marked a dangerous crossroads in U.S.-Iran relations, one that could either simmer down into diplomatic talks or spark a wider conflict. What happened next would depend on the strategic calculations of both sides, but it was clear that the world was holding its breath, wondering if this missile strike would be the beginning of something far greater. The missile strike against the USS Abraham Lincoln sent shockwaves through the international community, raising alarms over the possibility of a full-scale military conflict between Iran and the United States. But the attack itself, which took place in the early hours of the morning, was just one part of a much larger, complex series of events. To understand the full scale of the situation, we must first look at the details surrounding the launch and its timing. The USS Abraham Lincoln had been operating in the Persian Gulf for several weeks as part of a broader U.S. military presence in the region. The aircraft carrier was part of a show of force aimed at deterring Iran from escalating tensions. The ship's mission was to support U.S. allies and maintain control over critical shipping lanes that passed through the Gulf, particularly the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point through which a significant portion of the world's oil supply is transported. As tensions between the U.S. and Iran escalated over the months, the Lincoln's presence was seen as a critical part of the U.S. strategy to counter Iranian influence and military activities in the region. But on that day, the aircraft carrier was caught off guard by an unexpected missile strike. The attack, which occurred just after sunrise, was carried out with pinpoint precision. The missile, later confirmed to be an Iranian Fateh missile, was launched from a hidden position on the Iranian coastline. Iranian forces had previously tested Fateh missiles, but this strike marked the first time the missile had been used in an offensive action against such a significant target. The missile flew across the Gulf at an astonishing speed, skimming just above the waves before entering the ship's immediate airspace. Its trajectory was calculated to avoid detection by most defense systems, utilizing a combination of low-altitude flight and a precise guidance system that reportedly involved a mix of satellite tracking and advanced radar technology. In fact, sources close to the Pentagon later revealed that the missile's course had been so carefully calculated that it passed within just 200 meters of the USS Abraham Lincoln's flight deck. If it had struck the ship directly, the damage could have been catastrophic. Inside the ship, the crew was jolted by the alarms that sounded moments before the missile's arrival. Though the Lincoln's defensive systems quickly engaged, there was little time to react. The ship's advanced Aegis combat system, designed to intercept incoming missiles, fired off countermeasures to intercept the incoming threat. However, the missile's low trajectory and speed caught the system off guard. In a twist of fate, a malfunction in one of the ship's radar systems caused a temporary delay in the missile detection process, allowing the Fateh missile to come dangerously close before being intercepted. A senior U.S. Navy officer later revealed in a private briefing that the ship had come closer than ever before to being struck by an Iranian missile. The officer emphasized that it was only through sheer luck that the missile failed to make contact. The attack, however, had the desired effect. The USS Abraham Lincoln had been shaken, and its crew, though not injured, was left in a state of shock. The incident was a clear message to the U.S. that Iran's missile capabilities were growing, and they were willing to use them to challenge American power in the region. On the Iranian side, the missile strike was not just a show of force, it was a calculated move in a high-stakes game. Iranian officials, in a statement released shortly after the attack, claimed that the missile launch was a direct response to U.S. naval provocations. They argued that the U.S. presence in the Gulf was an infringement on their sovereignty, and this attack was merely a demonstration of their ability to defend their territory. However, experts suggest that the timing of the strike was more than just coincidental. It came at a time when tensions were at a boiling point, with U.S. sanctions on Iran tightening and political rhetoric growing increasingly hostile. The missile strike seemed to be an attempt to signal that Iran would not back down, and that any continued military presence in the Gulf would come with severe consequences. The world reacted quickly to the news of the missile attack. The United Nations called for an emergency meeting, while leaders from major global powers condemned the strike as an act of aggression. Behind the scenes, however, diplomatic channels were already buzzing with activity. The U.S. State Department called for an immediate de-escalation, while the Pentagon began to prepare for a potential retaliation. Within hours, U.S. military officials were discussing options ranging from airstrikes on Iranian missile sites to larger-scale military operations in the region. The attack on the USS Abraham Lincoln was not just a military strike. It was a symbol of Iran's defiance and a message that the country was willing to push back against U.S. influence in the Gulf. And as the days passed, it became clear that this incident would have far-reaching consequences, not just for U.S.-Iran relations, but for the broader geopolitical landscape in the Middle East. The world was now on edge, waiting to see how the United States would respond, and whether this missile strike was just the beginning of something much larger. The missile strike on the USS Abraham Lincoln was an unprecedented act of aggression. But it was not the first time the U.S. and Iran had clashed over military might in the region. What made this attack so significant was not only the weapon used, but the timing and the message it sent. At the center of this attack was the Fateh missile, an advanced and highly precise weapon system developed by Iran. Over the years, Iran had been steadily building its missile capabilities, with the Fateh missile being a centerpiece of its growing arsenal. Unlike many of Iran's previous missiles, which were often seen as crude, the Fateh was a sophisticated piece of technology, combining cutting-edge guidance systems with a formidable payload. The missile was designed to be difficult to detect, difficult to intercept, and, perhaps most importantly, capable of reaching targets hundreds of miles away. The Fateh missile had long been regarded as a show of strength by Iran, a weapon that represented the nation's increasing sophistication in defense technologies. With a range of over 300 miles, the missile was capable of striking critical targets, including U.S. military installations in the Middle East, with incredible accuracy. The missile's guidance system, a combination of satellite and ground-based radar technologies, was said to have been upgraded just months before the strike on the USS Abraham Lincoln. Experts revealed that the Iranian military had tested the Fateh missile in secret locations along the Persian Gulf, learning from each trial and making adjustments to improve the missile's effectiveness. Sources within the Pentagon speculated that this particular strike was the result of months, if not years, of planning and preparation, with Iranian intelligence closely monitoring the movements of the Abraham Lincoln to determine the best moment to strike. The missile strike itself was only a small part of a much larger strategy. According to some analysts, Iran had been growing increasingly frustrated with the United States military presence in the Gulf, which had been perceived by Tehran as an infringement on its sovereignty. The U.S. had been conducting naval exercises and stationing military vessels in the region as a show of force, often in response to what Washington perceived as Iranian provocations. But for Iran, the presence of these American assets represented a significant challenge to its regional ambitions. Over the years, Iran had worked tirelessly to bolster its military capabilities, focusing not just on missiles, but also on unconventional warfare tactics like cyber attacks and proxy forces spread across the Middle East. By launching the Fateh missile, Iran was making it clear that it had the ability to strike at the heart of American military power, and it wasn't afraid to do so if provoked. The attack on the Abraham Lincoln was seen by many in Washington as a bold, if not reckless, move. Senior U.S. officials were left scrambling to understand the motivations behind the attack. The missile strike seemed to come out of nowhere. One moment, the U.S. was engaged in routine military operations, and the next, one of its most advanced carriers was under threat. While some experts argued that Iran's decision to target the Abraham Lincoln was based on calculated geopolitical strategy, others believed it was a desperate, almost symbolic attempt by Tehran to demonstrate its power. Regardless of the motivations behind it, the U.S. response was swift and intense. While the missile attack failed to strike the ship directly, it was a wake-up call for the U.S. military. In the hours following the attack, the U.S. military immediately began to reassess its posture in the Gulf. Within hours, the Pentagon had mobilized several aircraft carriers and additional support vessels to the region in a show of strength. However, this was not just a military response. It was also a diplomatic maneuver. The U.S. government, led by President Trump, swiftly condemned Iran's actions, calling it a direct threat to international stability. Behind closed doors, American diplomats worked furiously with their allies in the United Nations to call for sanctions against Iran. U.S. officials also reached out to key partners in the Middle East, including Israel and Saudi Arabia, to discuss a unified strategy to counter Iran's growing military threat. Iran, however, remained defiant in the face of the U.S. response. Tehran's official line was that the missile strike was a legitimate defensive action, one that was necessary to protect the country's sovereignty in the face of increasing American military pressure. Iranian officials issued statements claiming that the U.S. had been provoking them for months, and that the missile strike was simply a response to American actions in the region. But beyond the official rhetoric, some experts argued that the timing of the attack was no coincidence. In the weeks leading up to the strike, the U.S. had been ramping up its sanctions on Iran, placing additional pressure on the Iranian economy. Furthermore, intelligence sources suggested that Iran had been following the Abraham Lincoln's movements for weeks, waiting for the perfect opportunity to launch its missile. At the heart of this crisis was the growing military rivalry between the two nations. The United States had long been the dominant military force in the Persian Gulf, maintaining a network of bases and naval assets that stretched from Iraq to the Arabian Peninsula. Iran, on the other hand, had been using its resources to build up a formidable military, one that leveraged asymmetric tactics, proxy forces, and a growing missile capability to counterbalance American power. The missile strike against the Abraham Lincoln was a clear message from Iran that it was no longer intimidated by the United States and that it was willing to strike at the heart of American military assets if necessary. For many in Washington, this attack signaled a new phase in the conflict between the two nations, one where traditional military dominance might no longer guarantee the same level of security it once had. In the aftermath of the attack, the world was left to wonder what would happen next. The missile strike on the Abraham Lincoln had sent a clear message. The U.S. could no longer take its position in the Gulf for granted. Iran had demonstrated its ability to challenge American military power, and it was unlikely that the U.S. would let this act of aggression go unanswered. The question now was how far each side would be willing to go in the face of escalating tensions. Would the United States retaliate directly, risking a broader conflict? Or would it seek to defuse the situation diplomatically, hoping to avoid a full-scale war? What was clear, however, was that this missile strike was not just an isolated incident. It was part of a larger struggle for control over the Persian Gulf, a region that remains one of the most strategically important areas in the world. With both the U.S. and Iran now on edge, the stakes had never been higher, and the possibility of further confrontation loomed large. The world could only wait to see how this high-stakes drama would unfold. The missile strike against the USS Abraham Lincoln set off a chain of events with consequences that would reverberate far beyond the Persian Gulf. In the aftermath, both the United States and Iran found themselves at a crossroads, with the potential for escalation hanging heavily in the air. While the immediate damage from the attack was limited, the long-term impact on international relations, particularly between the U.S. and Iran, could not be overstated. For the United States, the attack on one of its most advanced military assets in a region it had long considered its sphere of influence was nothing short of a wake-up call. The U.S. military, already on high alert in the Gulf, quickly reassessed its approach to the region. The attack exposed vulnerabilities in the U.S. defense systems, even if the missile itself had not struck the ship directly. The Abraham Lincoln was a symbol of American power, and its close call had shaken the Pentagon's confidence. A series of classified meetings took place over the following weeks as military leaders weighed their options. Retaliation was considered, but the ramifications of a military strike on Iran were fraught with danger. A direct attack could spark a full-scale war, and the U.S. was not ready to engage in a conflict of such magnitude without careful planning. Intelligence efforts were ramped up, with special operations teams being dispatched to track down the source of the attack and to monitor potential Iranian military movements. On the diplomatic front, the United States faced immense pressure to act.